the runaway. You can hear it in the trees. The old tiefling stopped talking as suddenly as he started. He instead picked up an old dead branch, long since stripped of its bark, held it in his hand for a second, and it instantly came alive, and he used this to poke his fire. It doesn't look like much, but this is a perfect fire. Misho sat back, confused. Everything the druid had done was confusing. She had been watching him for years now. He would always come with the summer solstice, and she would watch him as he collected sticks and twigs. She would watch him as he spoke in a language that she didn't understand. And now, in her 15th year, he finally decided to invite her for a meal. She had known since she was younger, maybe 13, that he could tell that she was there. But this time, he turned his head to the tiny turquoise dragonborn, and he said, "You must be hungry by now. You've been there for hours." She had seen fires. The dwarves had them. They powered their forges. They were massive, the size of a room. She had seen fires of campers, of people on journeys, and they were even larger than this. But this was not a fire. This was the moments before a fire died. I know, but listen. You have a great fire, right? And the flames lick up, but what do you lose? The light obscures the stars, the smoke disturbs the leaves, the crackling disturbs the silence. But this is perfect. If you stay close to it, it'll keep you warm. If you put food on it, it will cook. But it does none of those other things that other fires do. Misho sat back and tried her hardest to look as if she wasn't confused, and finally managed to pipe up.
What were you saying? About the trees?
The old tiefling once again sat on his haunches and laughed. Yeah. You can hear it in the trees. You can hear it in the song that a mother bird sings to tell her children that she's coming back with food. You can even hear it in the sound of a dying animal. You can hear the gods speak. Not these new gods. These gods of men, these gods of elves, these gods of dwarves. They need someone to speak for them. They need someone to believe in them. But my gods have always existed, before dragons or giants or any creature you've ever heard of. And they do not need to be believed. If a tree falls in a forest, it doesn't matter if anyone's around to hear it. The point is, the tree still falls. Misha woke up. The first light of morning had pierced through her tent like an arrow. She was grown now, an adult, and she was looking for Delane. Delane had disappeared, and he hadn't come this summer solstice. And after consulting with her mother, she decided it was best that she went out looking for him. She walked out of her tent. Summer was almost over. The cold wind of fall, the time of dying, the time of feasting, the time when you prepare for a winter that you may not survive, was fast approaching. And she needed to find her friend. In front of her camp, her fire, just hot enough to keep you warm, had died. An ill portent. She closed her eyes and she listened. She listened for their voices. And she heard the wind, but it was drowned out by something else. Her stomach was rumbling, and she couldn't hear their voices in the trees, and she couldn't hear something else, something lurking in those woods. But it could hear her, and it could see her, and it decided it was best if it simply lied in wait for her to come back. The escaped slave. If you ask the artificers at the capital, they could tell you a lot. They could tell you that an airship isn't actually magical, despite what common people, and especially those races who still lived on the ground, believed. No, you see, an airship is filled with gases that are lighter than air, and that is why it rises. They could also tell you that a musket ball fired from an army musket travels at 390 feet per second. They could tell you that a collision between said musket ball and said airship would be catastrophic. It would, unless for some strange reason, the musket ball had fallen below 200 feet per second, results in an explosion from the friction of it piercing the covering and igniting the gas within. The problem with these gases, they would tell you, is despite being lighter than air, they're more volatile. If you had asked Kevin about any of this, he wouldn't say anything. That's because Kevin can't speak. You see, as gnomes know from their birth, Kenku can't speak unless they're spoken to. It's a sign of their lack of intelligence. It's a sign that they're not actually an intelligent animal. If you asked one of the engineers, why is it against the law to speak to a Kenku, they would tell you, well, if you spoke to a Kenku, it may imitate your voice. And then a trainer might feel sympathy for what is an animal. And as we all know, you can't feel sympathy for an animal. We don't cry for lions at the zoo, do we? We don't cry for a bear that's been baited. And you don't cry for a Kenku falling through the air. But, and this is the big but, Kevin could tell you what would happen if a musket ball going under 200 feet per second hits an airship. The first thing you would hear is a hiss, like a snake. And for the first time without that collar of deafness that didn't allow you to hear a sound, you heard something. You couldn't help but imitate it. The second thing he would tell you is all of a sudden you feel a jerk and you start falling faster and faster and faster. And as you're falling, you may even crash through a window. And for the first time in your life, it'll feel like you're flying. And then, as suddenly as it started, you realize you aren't. You realize you're living your worst nightmare, and you're falling. If you asked a gnome, why did they clip a Kenku's wings, they would tell you that there would be no suspense, no fear in the performances that they put on if they couldn't fall. If they couldn't fall down from this kingdom in the sky into the ground. If you asked an artificer what could cause a bullet to slow to under 200 feet per second, they would tell you, well, if it was shot from an incredible range, the force of friction and inertia would eventually slow it. And beyond that, if it was shot at an effective range, it would have to be magical. And if you ask them about those Kenku that fall, what happens to them, they would tell you that they die when they hit the ground. And as Kevin fell through the air, the wind through his hair, that sensation of flying, being enjoyed because he knew it might be the last time he feels anything. Suddenly, he jerked, and he fell to the ground, and he landed on his feet, slowly as his feathers from the flapping of his wings. So you can forgive me if I don't give much credence to the opinions of those artificers in the capital. The new day. Despite some of the negative things that had happened, admittedly, today was a great day. Admittedly, he had lost his job. Undeservingly, he would remind you. He had lost his house. Perhaps more deservingly, there was a bender and a lot of alcohol because of the job loss, and he would probably never get to go on a date with that tabaxi barmaid, Teresa, who, in retrospect, never did ask him about that book he was pretending to read to look intelligent and wise. However, today was a good day, despite all of that, because today, Longbeards was free. Without all of these things to hold him down, he was finally doing what he always wanted to do, and go on an adventure. Blacksmiths and adventurers have a symbiotic relationship. Well, symbiotic in the way that a drow has a symbiotic relationship with a giant spider. The spider only gets to eat because the drow has killed. Blacksmiths always have to hear about the adventurers' tales of riding dragons, tales of fighting dragons, tales of seducing dragons. The seduction part always made him uncomfortable, but if someone hadn't seduced a dragon, he never would have been born. However, now he would make his own tales. Now he would become an adventurer. Nay, he was an adventurer, he thought. He looked at his hammer, already stained red with goblin blood, and little bits of goblin brain and little bits of goblin bone sticking out from the scales around his face. He had already killed a monster, a goblin, who was alone and crying for help for his friends, but it was a goblin nevertheless, and he had heard tales of goblins. Damn goblins, they've wrecked my armor, can you fix this up? Yeah, the chainmail's great, but it won't hold up against goblin arrows. You got anything more sizable? Oh, yeah, I can't buy splint mail. The last time I had that, I couldn't even get out of a simple pit trap. Fucking goblins. See, he already knew all the tropes. He knew everything there was to know about being an adventurer. And surely, his adventurer brethren would accept him. Surely they would come up to him and they would greet him as one of his own. And eventually he would have his own group, his faithful followers. And eventually he would become the leader of a union of adventurers united against the oppression of these monarchies, a union that could work for the common people, not simply kings. He could be that adventurer. And you know what would happen then? They would ask him about this day. Of course they would. They would say, Longbeards, however did you become an adventurer? And he would tell them. He would tell them everything. He would tell them about the job, the house, the tabaxi barmaid, maybe fudge a couple details there. And he would tell them about the goblin before he even found a group. He had slayed a goblin. Admittedly, it was limping. Admittedly, it begged for his life. Admittedly, he kind of felt bad about it and felt like it was softened up. But he still killed a goblin on his first day of adventuring. And eventually, he would tell them about this moment where he saw on the horizon the Dragon's Folly, a famous tavern among adventurers, one of the most famous, well, around these parts. I mean, most of these adventurers are pretty low level, and he didn't really believe what they said about dragons. did believe the goblin parts. Most of them ended up dying, and goblin merchants did always seem to come back with some of his handiwork armor with new and fresh bloodstains they had to scrub. But hey, it was a symbiotic relationship, blacksmiths and goblins. But here, the Dragon's Folly, as the place where adventurers started. He would tell them about how everyone in there wanted to join up with him, and how he became the leader of a ragtag group of misfits, and his adventure was just beginning. And that is the story he would tell. And that is why he would tell them. Today was a great day. And nothing could possibly go wrong. The 2-in-1. Seance, he now could admit silently to himself, had gotten himself in over his head.
You haven't,
the voice said. He responded without speaking. It was something he had to learn to do when he heard his brother's voice. No, I really think I have. I mean, I've only had a year of wizarding school.
It's fine. You have my magic now.
The voice responded.
You'll be fine, okay? We just need to find him. What are we doing here?
Seance didn't know. The bar was dark. The only light was provided by torches on the wall. Isn't that a fire code hazard? He thought to himself.
It doesn't matter. Why are we here?
Well, Seance said out loud and then quickly silenced himself by taking a sip of his ale. Warm, not cooled like the ones in Wizarding College. Well, he thought now, I need somebody to help me, don't I?
What do you mean?
I need somebody, anybody. I need anybody to help me. I need somebody to, take care of it.
What are you talking about?
I have 6 HP, okay? I am a leaf. If anything, the sorcerer will kill me the second he sees me. The voice sighed. Seance pondered for a second. How can a voice sigh? I mean, a sigh is a gust of air coming out of a mouth. Atomically, it makes no sense. Thoughts are heard in English, but have you ever tried to think a sigh? You're remembering a sound.
Why are you thinking about this?
The voice cut him off. Okay, listen. I mean, there's, look around. He scanned the bar. See, there's a human fighter over there, and another human fighter, and is that another human fighter? Why are there so many human fighters?
Well, I suppose because there's a lot of humans, and they don't need magic.
Well, I'm just saying, it seems a little trite, don't you think?
Listen, just link up with any of these losers.
No. Seance began. I need to find the right one. I need to find someone who can handle himself. Someone different. Sitting at the bar with a large glass of mead was a dragonborn. Something you usually don't see in a shit-kicker town like that. And he was speaking to, well, of course, a human fighter, of all things. Yeah, I'm a pretty big deal, I'm a pretty great adventurer, the Dragonborn began. You see, he hefted a large war hammer. The hammer itself, its head, stained red with the blood of a fallen enemy, no doubt a foe strong and mighty, was proof of the adventurer's pedigree. It's already got the stains, In my town, I was known as Longbeards, the powerful and mighty. And Seance realized that this was the perfect companion, and in conjunction, Solange spoke.
Go and fucking do this already. I want my own body. We didn't even have to share a room. Oh my god.
So he approached the dragon. Hello, I wanted to introduce myself. My name's Seance, a wizard, top of my class graduated, totally graduated.
Ah,
Longbeards began. "And I am Longbeards, powerful, mighty sorcerer." And you've done this before, yeah? "Of course. Yes. Millions of times. Great hero. Amazing hero." "Well, I heard some people talking over there, and apparently there's something of a monster in the woods. And I was wondering, you're an adventurer, I'm an adventurer. I was wondering if you could possibly help." "Yeah, of course. Yeah, right away. What's in it for me, though?" Well, if we go to Elash, there's an adventurers guild outpost there, and surely they would reward us for killing this monster. It's feeding off of sheep and all these other things. It's just causing a catastrophe, and yeah. We could get into the Adventurers League, the premier adventurers guild of all the kingdoms underneath our emperor. I mean, it's a shoo-in." The Dragonborn's eyes lit up. "Adventurers Guild, you say?" He smiled. "Let's go." The board. Carpentry had lost its spark. Well, there weren't many sparks with carpentry. Dom Flamingo perhaps guessed that this is why he learned to love it. No sparks, no fire. Just like him, Wood was not the biggest fan of the open flame. But he had mastered it. He had become the best that there was. He made a masterwork at the age of 43, old for a human, but young for an elf. Practically still a teenager. And then more masterworks, and more masterworks, and eventually it just kind of reaches the point that you say, that's it. Is this the next 500 years of my life? Making chairs and desks for nobles? So he went adventuring. And if carpentry was boring, this was ennui. This was the worst thing that could happen. He wandered through the woods. He had gotten hungry, and he had tracked down what looked like a magnificent stag drinking out of the water. He steadied his bow and arrow, ready to pierce its heart, when suddenly he heard,
"Hello? Anybody? Hello?"
The stag ran, and Don Flamingo was going to go hungry. However, maybe as a blessing, there was someone else in these woods, and with a little bit of know-how, he tracked them down, and what he saw was a sad sight. Standing there in the woods was a tiefling and a dragonborn, obviously not too versed in the directions of this area, and even less versed in the necessary art of survival. And he could hear them yell, "Hello? Anyone? Monster, are you out there? We're here, so shiver in fear." The Dragonborn piped up, "Yes, we are the greatest monster hunters in the world." Dom Flamingo pondered for a moment. Maybe this was nature telling him that it should be allowed to take its course. Maybe that if he interfered, nature would interfere back with him, and he should let them starve. But then he heard them speak to each other. Are you sure about this?" the tiefling began. "I mean, you said you were an adventurer. Surely you know how to find your way through the woods." The dragon paused, obviously not sure of what to say next. Well, Usually we have a guide. I mean, if I hadn't spent all my gold on a rowdy good time after the last adventure and all of my adventure party members died tragically, I'll tell you that story sometime, then I would have hired a guide, but no, I don't know how to find my way in the woods. Do you know anything else about this monster? The Tiefling was the one now distracted. All I heard was it's out here, and the reward is massive. Totally worth it, A huge reward. Just for finding one monster. It's not even hard. Come on. Dom Flamingo was interested. Despite their inability to survive in the woods, perhaps this was nature telling him something else. Perhaps this was a call to adventure.